I'm here to welcome Nancy Greer to this youth webinar at lunchtime. Nancy's got over 10 years of experience as a researcher, as a research assistant on many large and small research projects connected to gambling, about gambling. So currently she's enrolled in her PhD at Central Queensland University and is working part-time at the Australian Gambling Research Centre with Dr. Rebecca Jenkinson, who was the presenter of the previous youth webinar, one of the co-presenters of the previous youth gambling webinar. She has, from my brief exploration via Google, at least 28 publications. A small number of these are reports, including for the foundation, but the vast majority are in academic peer-reviewed journals. She's been the recipient of a few awards. The most obvious one, or the one that tickles my fancy, if you like, is she was the joint recipient of the Ig Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017 with her current supervisor, Professor Matt Rockloff, and they were awarded this in Stockholm in Sweden, which is a big feather in your cap. Today, she'll speak to us about esports, loot boxes, video gaming, skins, esports. She has a vast knowledge in this area, and I know I'll be learning a lot from her. So welcome, Nancy.
Thanks, Rosa. Bear with me while I share my PowerPoint with you guys. Wait on. All right, gotta share my screen. Okay, can everyone see the PowerPoint slides?
Yep.
Yep, great. Okay, I'll put it on presentation mode. All right, thank you to the VRGF for inviting me here today to present on esports, and thank you for coming. Hopefully I'm able to provide you with some insight into what esports are and all the other types of products related to it, including gambling. I'll start off though with a bit of a trip down memory lane. Video gaming itself is the genesis for esports, and it's been around for since the 1960s. And as you can see from these slides, you may remember some of these games yourself. They changed over time. The graphics became better. We had PC games, handheld games, consoles, but by the time we reached the 2000s and the internet came along, video gaming really took off. And by 2007, we could all play games on our mobile phones through apps. And you can see in the 2010s that it's really taken off. And this year's a little different. We've all gone through the pandemic this year and the various lockdowns, and the play apart together came out of the video gaming industry, where they encouraged people to play games. So we really have seen an increase in gaming in 2020. Just a little tidbit, they actually took that slogan from the World Health Organization, who encouraged people who are not together to find ways to remain connected, and video games is one of those. The graph I have here is just a general trend of video gaming in Australian households over the past 15 years or so. As you can see, there was quite a big bump from 2007 to 2009. And as I was saying, this is when you could, have video games on your mobile phone applications. So it really had a bump up, and around 91% of households in Australia have video games. And of course, for the second graph here, it's much more popular amongst children, adolescents, and young adults. And then it sort of drops off as you get older, but still quite popular in all age groups. Today's video games, as compared to, say, when I was a kid and my first gaming console was an Atari and Froggo across the road, they're very connected with technology and the internet. You can play it on a range of devices. You've got virtual reality, you've got consoles, and it's connected to social media in a big way. So often when you play a game these days, especially the ones on your mobile phone, it will ask you to connect via Facebook or Google or a number of social network sites. You can watch people play games on Twitch through streaming. You can stream yourself playing video games. Video games these days are quite monetized. So back in the day, you'd buy your game, you'd buy the console, and you'd play. These days, games more so work towards a model where they're free, and then where the video game developers make their money is by getting consumers to buy things within the game. So a lot of microtransactions, or you might spend $1 here, $1 there on different items to help you progress in the game, or get something that you really, something shiny that you really want, such as a loot box, which you open and get something else, or a skin. I'll go into skins and loot boxes later because they require some explanation. But it's just to say that video game developers do engage in tactics to get people to make purchases, maybe that they don't want to. And the last element, which I'll be talking about today, is competitive video gaming, which is esports. Sometimes, like before I started looking at esports, it was very much a fuzzy idea in my head. So I thought today I would play a video for everyone, just so you can get an idea of what an esports event looks like. So this will only go for about 20 seconds. So that was a promo for the Melbourne Esports Open, the second one of it in a row. It started 2018. So as you can see, it's very much like sports events. So it's got big crowds. It's got prizes for competitions. They're sponsored by advertising. They've got merchandise. They've got all that stuff that what you see in sports and other events. And so it's not surprising that in recent years that gambling has not far followed the popularity of esports. Oh, no, I'm trying to go forward from my screen. Aha, sorry. Okay, cool. I don't know if anyone plays games that's logged in, or you certainly know someone does, or you have clients or students. But these games that are here are a lot of the very popular esports games that are out there. So stuff like CSGO, League of Legends, FIFA, Fortnite, most recent one. There's dozens of different video games that are played competitively, so esports. This graph here just shows a global audience of esports over the years, and within each year the audience is increasing by about 12%, so it's growing quite rapidly. This chart I have here is the difference that I see with esports compared to, say, sporting events, is that they do have their live events like the one I showed you, but they're very much online. So because it's video games, people can play competitively with each other remotely, right? So a lot of it is watched via online streaming through platforms such as Twitch or YouTube or Mixer. And so last year, of the top 25 esports events, there were over 12 billion hours watched online by people. So it's very popular. And the top one here we have is League of Legends, and that was 350 million hours watched by people on one of these platforms. In Australia, so esports has actually been around since the 1970s, and it's very big in Asia, it's very big in the US, and it's slowly growing in Australia in recent years. The figures that I have seen, it's more common amongst males and young adults. I just want to say throughout this presentation, when I talk about young people, young adults, I'm mainly going to be referring to people who are 18 to 24 years, because there's not a lot of data, if any data out there on adolescents or children. So I'm only able to report on the young adult side of things, but it's very popular amongst the young adults, those slightly older, and of course, those who play video games. Australia itself has esports leagues. They have leagues within high schools, within universities, professional leagues, and the market for esports in Australia is growing and growing. I put a little snapshot there from an article I saw online stating that Perth is going to build an esports stadium, which is quite interesting. I know Sydney has events each year, and Melbourne had its esports open a few years in a row now, and it's all built around growing that tourism. I have a figure from last year from the Australian Communication Media Authority. So during a week in May in 2019, 1.7 million Australian adults watched or played esports. That coincides with this Sydney picture up here of the Sydney Intel Masters, which is held each year. So 1.7 million, roughly 8% of adults in that week watched esports. So, and of that, 19% were 18 to 34 years. So it's very much attracting that younger audience. There's also controversies though, much like sports. I saw an article last year where some Victorian men were charged with match fixing for esports. So yeah, keep in mind that that sort of thing happens as well. This graph shows, and just goes back to my point on attracting youth and attracting more males than females. This is a study by YouGov, so you can see the trend for the younger groups participating more and males. And here's another study with Australians, which was done by a colleague of mine, Alex Russell, and the team at CQU last year. This report's available. So it asked New South Wales youth about their engagement in various emerging activities related to video games and gambling. And so what we have here in a lifetime is that, you know, just over 40% of New South Wales youth have watched esports, and about 1/3 in the last 12 months. No real difference between the 18 to 24-year-olds compared to the slightly older group. So you can see how popular it is amongst younger groups. And as I was ahead of myself before about gambling. So with anything that's becoming quite popular, gambling has not long followed on esports. My PhD is very much around esports betting. So I quickly discovered that there were two types of esports betting that are very different and distinguish it a little bit from other forms of betting. The first is the typical monetary betting. So betting on esports in Australia has been offered by sports betting operators such as Sportsbet or Ladbrokes since about 2015. So it's only recent in the last 5 years. But it's been offered a lot longer by offshore gambling operators that offer larger markets for esports betting, such as Unicorn or GGBet. And the thing is that they're illegal to offer to Australians. They more so offer money and credit as currencies, but they offer cryptocurrencies, so things such as Bitcoin. Some of them have their own cryptocurrencies to bet with. And the thing about cryptocurrencies is that they allow you to bet anonymously in some instances, and so it's maybe more risky for the consumer to do so. They're not as protected. And a study I saw in 2017 by Gainsbury and colleagues actually found that esports bettors preferred these offshore dedicated esports betting operators than the ones that are provided locally in Australia, maybe because they offer more markets. So I said there were two ways to bet on esports. That's the first one. The second one is with skins. So I'll try to explain what a skin is. If I don't do so adequately, feel free to ask me a question at the end. So most video games have skins in them. They started being offered around 2012 by the video game developer Valve via the Steam platform. Most often for games like CSGO, Dota, PUBG, which I have little pictures of on the screen. They don't functionally do anything to the game. They actually just make items like this gun that I've shown visually look different. So they're only aesthetic. But some skins can be worth thousands of dollars because you can buy them. And what happened around 2012 with CSGO skins in particular is that a marketplace emerged for these skins because you can buy them, you can trade them, you can sell them for money. So they had a currency. And what happened is because the platform they were sold on allowed these skins to be removed and deposited on third-party websites, is that skin betting websites started to appear. The most common one was CSGO Lounge in 2012 to 14, and it saw a huge traffic of esports betting on skin betting on esports. Sorry. Over time, these websites have come and gone, shut down as they've been, sent cease and desist letters by the video game developers and different things. So as that happens, they start adding different currencies to bet on different types of items, like those based on blockchain technology. The thing with these websites which makes them of concern is that they're not regulated. They're not considered gambling websites by a lot of different countries and jurisdictions, including Australia, because the skins or the items themselves are not seen as a currency, as a money currency. They're seen as a virtual item, even though you could sell them for money. And another thing about these websites is that they're easily accessible to youth. Often you just log in via your Steam account or via your Google account, and you just tick a box to say that you're over 18 and you deposit a skin and you start betting. So in that respect, the skin betting side of it is a little bit more concerning for youth. So what do we know about Australian esports bettors? There's not a lot of research out there on it, but I will go through it. In the last couple of years, the gambling prevalence surveys have started asking about esports betting. So there were 2 done over the last couple of years in New South Wales and Victoria. And it shows that in the Australian adult population, esports has a low prevalence, so less than 1%. But it's higher for males, so it's about 1% than females, found in the Victorian survey. And it's high amongst the young adults, so that 18 to 24-year-old group, about 3.3% of the population had bet on esports in the last 12 months. But the thing is that esports in this context was only asked about monetary betting on esports, so it didn't cover skin betting on esports and how prevalent that may be. This figure's from the same survey that I quoted earlier by Russell and colleagues. So they also asked New South Wales youth about betting on esports in their lifetime. And so when we go back and we compare that 3.3% figure from these prevalence surveys to this figure, we find that in the last 12 months, about 12%, about 15% of this New South Wales 18 to 24, 25, 29 group have gambled on esports in the last 12 months, which is interesting. And if you see on the last bar, the 19.6% of 18 to 24-year-olds actually first gambled on esports when they're under 18 years of age. And I went back to the survey and I looked at the question that was asked, and it just asked, have you bet on have you bet on esport? Have you participated in any of these activities in the last 12 months? So it didn't say anything about money. So potentially this could include, they could have included their esports skin betting on this, or informal betting on esports. So it might explain why the figure is a lot higher than the prevalence survey, and that it's amongst youth. Another study which I found compared esports bettors to sports bettors. So how different are they? Demographically, this study found that while both esports bettors and sports bettors were predominantly male, the esports betting side of it had more of a balance of genders. Esports bettors were younger than sports bettors. They were more likely to be employed, have a higher education, higher income, and be ethnically diverse. So it does show that they're a little bit demographically different to sports bettors, at least found in this study. But it also found that esports bettors were highly involved in other forms of gambling, so sports betting or pokies or horse races, and that they did so, they gambled on more activities and more intensely than sports bettors, so more frequently. I'd say the limitations of this study are that the esports bettors were actually selected from a group of sports bettors. So they're people who already bet on sports. So in that respect, it might not represent accurately a group of esports bettors. And that it did actually just ask about cash betting on esports and didn't include virtual currency betting. There are other international research, all the research on esports betting in Australia. There are international studies which also have some evidence, which I'll go through. The UK Gambling Commission has been asking about esports betting for the last at least 3 years in their yearly studies. And what they found amongst adults is that this lifetime betting on esports is around 6%. And I think it was about 4% for the last 12 months. And that included money and skins. And for the younger adults, this was actually 17% amongst the 18 to 24-year-olds. So it's quite high amongst that young group. But that the younger group seemed to be leaning in preference to betting with skins than money, when you see 14% compared to 10% betting on it. Other studies have looked at esports betting in the context of which other things they're associated with. Researchers found that people who watch esports are more likely to bet on esports. That was surprising. Those who are more engaged in gambling activities tend to bet on esports. Maybe they're highly engaged gamblers and they just are adding esports to it. And those who gamble online too. There are other types of emerging products which converge video gaming with gambling. Some of these have been studied, like loot boxes and social casino games, which are basically, if you've ever had an app on your phone and played a game that looks like a poker machine, that's what a social casino game is. So research shows that people who play social casino games, who buy loot boxes, are also more likely to bet on esports. And then there was a study I found that looked at video gamers, and it compared video gamers who had bet on esports, and those who bet on esports are more likely to be exposed to gambling advertising via esports, and they were more likely to accept gambling advertising, which is interesting, compared to those who didn't bet on esports. So as with any activity, and I've done a bit of research myself on gambling related harm, and so there's not much research out there, but I'm putting it here on the association between esports betting being at risk for gambling problems and harm, and whether it is a problem. So the first two studies that I've listed here are those that I mentioned earlier, the prevalence surveys. The first one in New South Wales, 24% of the esports bettors were classified at-risk gamblers, and that was compared to 7.2% of just the overall total gamblers. Rockcliffe study, the Victorian study, measured it on harm scale. So there's a 10-item harm scale. So a lot of it looks at financial harms, relationship harms, emotional well-being. And so out of 10, on average, esports bettors were 0.9 harms, which doesn't seem like much, but it was significantly higher than the 0.19 that all gamblers reported on average. And then back to that study by Gainsbury, the esports bettors compared to sports bettors had much higher problem gambling scores on average than the sports bettors. So if you can see here, they had a score of 9. So the highest level of problem gambling is a score of 8 or above, whereas the sports bettors have 3.4, which is still at a moderate risk, but they were significantly higher than the sports bettors. And the survey with New South Wales youth, the last one, actually found that the sample that was slightly older, so the 25 to 29-year-olds, their esports betting had a higher association with gambling-related harm than it was for the younger group of 18 to 24-year-olds. So I don't know what to draw from that, other than maybe it takes time to develop harms from your gambling, but I think more research needs to be done, particularly around the harms associated with potential harms associated with esports betting and how other activities might be influencing that harm. Because, you know, if you're betting on esports, you're probably betting on something else as well. I promised I'd talk a little bit about loot boxes and skins. So I have a picture here of a loot box. There's been a bit of research on loot boxes of late. I'll just try and explain, hopefully adequately, what a loot box is. So most video games have loot boxes. Basically, they don't always look like a box. Sometimes they look like a, you know, pinata or a donkey or a vase or something like that. But what happens is that it's an item that you obtain. Either you can get it for free by playing the game, you can buy it, but you don't know what's inside before you open it. So there's that chance element of what am I going to get out of this? There's that excitement of opening it. And you can either get something functional that will help you in the game, like a weapon or currency, or you can either get something cosmetic, which is the skin, which changes the appearance of, say, a character or a weapon. So you don't really get, and some of them, again, may be worth quite a bit. They might be quite rare. You might want to show them off in game to your friends. So in that respect, some are quite coveted. I won't talk too much about loot boxes because in a couple of weeks, the next part of this seminar series will be on loot boxes. But a study that I was involved with at CQ with Rockcliffe, Matthew Rockcliffe, did find that 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds have opened a loot box in a game, and around 1/3 had actually purchased a loot box. So there's been concern around loot boxes themselves for a couple of reasons. The main reason is that because a loot box is something you might buy for a chance to win something that you don't know, an outcome you don't know, that it approximates gambling. And the second reason is that you can get skins out of loot boxes, which then can be used, say, for betting on esports or other games of chance. So the websites that do esports betting, some of them offer centralized gambling on stuff like roulette or a coin flip, different types of activities. And quite a few studies too on loot boxes have been done in the last couple of years. and they have shown an association between buying loot boxes and so that more you spend loot boxes on loot boxes associated with being more at risk for gambling harm. So there is a connection between gambling and purchasing loot boxes. All right. I promised I'd talk about esports during the COVID lockdowns. So interesting thing, during the lockdowns, we all know that because we were social distancing and things were shut down, that sports was one of the activities that was shut down, particularly between this period in Australia, between March and May when the pandemic first rose, and gambling venues weren't available. So, you know, people could no longer bet on sports, or go to gambling venues and play pokies and that stuff. So the question is, you know, would they have substituted for something else? Unlike sports though, because esports, yes, they do have live events where audiences go to, and those are cancelled. They were more easily transferable to an online environment because you're playing, the athletes are playing with each other via computers or consoles. So it could be adapted really easily to the online environment. In most cases, it was already set up that way. So during the pandemic, watching esports actually increased quite a bit. So the main viewing platform for esports is Twitch, and it doubled in viewership between March and April 2020. I read somewhere, it was in a report by Odds Matrix, that an estimated 50,000 esports events were ongoing during this time. So it's quite a big bump. Another interesting thing I saw happen was that because sports wasn't happening and the sports organisations therefore weren't running and they're not making money, they started holding special events, getting their sports athletes to play video games as competitors. So, you know, FIFA is a on the ground sport, but it's also a video game. And so these sports athletes were transferring it to esports playing and making money that way. And so that was a part of the audience growing for esports viewership during a pandemic. So betting on esports during the lockdown, not a lot of research is out there on it, but there are indicators from a lot of the media reports and industry data that I saw that suggests that esports betting is on the rise during the COVID lockdowns. Got some titles there for you. The first was that I noticed that some Australian sports betting operators started offering esports markets. There were new esports betting operators launched. So on screen I have Cloudbet, which is a cryptocurrency-based esports operator. They launched during pandemic. I saw quite a few others. The revenues for those who do dedicated esports betting operators actually increased for Luckbox and different GGBet and stuff like that. I saw a lot of sponsorship going on. So there are a few gambling operators that do sponsor esports events, and Betway is one of the most popular ones. But I did see more operators start to sponsor esports events, which was interesting. All overseas, so I'm not talking within Australia. And a report came out from Odds Matrix, and it was on esports betting during the pandemic lockdowns in Europe and Great Britain. So they looked at all this data coming out of the online gambling operators, and what they found is a 40% increase in esports betting, and that 80% of this was all to do with this sports genre of video games that were being played competitively, whereas usually the main esports betting markets are around games which are like fantasy based, like Dota, or first person shooter games like CSGO. But this is very much focused around that merge of traditional sports and esports, around sports themed events like FIFA and Formula One, stuff like that. And in this same report, what it found was that while some sports bettors just stopped betting altogether because the markets weren't there, some actually uptook esports betting for the first time. In Australia, there's been a couple of studies looking at gambling during COVID, comparing it to before COVID lockdowns and during, and in part, some of them looked at esports betting. So the Australian Gambling Research Centre, they released a report on gambling and COVID last month, and they reported on a range of different activities. But for esports, they found that before COVID, it was about 3.5% amongst adults, and it increased to 4.3% during COVID. Now, the change wasn't significant, but it is slightly higher. Just to put that in the context of other activities, race wagering and sports betting did remain consistent as well. But other things that have venue-based, like poker machines, Keno, bingo, they decreased during the lockdowns. Back to the loot boxes, they did actually ask about loot boxes as well. And buying loot boxes increased during COVID lockdowns as well by a couple percentage points. And the spend increased on average by about $20. Gainsbury and Blazinski did a study too. They looked at online gamblers in the past year. And of those, 14% had participated in online esports betting. Both during in the year from COVID lockdown, and of those 14%, 41% had actually stopped betting on esports during lockdown. You do see that trend with other things. Maybe it's because they wanted to save money, that sort of stuff. But what was interesting is that 31% had actually just started for the first time betting on esports during the lockdown. So that might be that, say, sports bettors were transitioning or replacing their sports betting with esports betting during lockdown, or another activity. And 17% saw no change, so just remained consistent. My screen isn't moving. All right. So that basically is the end, and I'll just summarize. So esports becoming much more popular in Australia as the years go by, particularly around young males. But it might not, by the figures we have, be as low in prevalence as we might think. It might be actually higher for esports betting, because we're not taking into consideration betting with skins. And esports bettors might be a unique group of gamblers. So at least when you compare them to the sports bettors, they're young, they're male, they're highly involved in gambling, and they're harmed from the gambling. So I think more research needs to be done. And of course, during COVID, esports viewership and betting was on a slight rise. But I think more research needs to be done around esports and esports betting. So I do have a publication, just to plug myself. Thanks to the VRGF, and I was awarded with an early career research grant last couple of years. And I did a study and a report on esports betting and skin gambling and its association with how involved they are with gambling and how harmed they are. And I compared them to groups of sports bettors and video gamers, and those who just watch esports. So yeah, have a look out for that. That will be out soon, I think. And thank you. Do I stop sharing my screen? Oh,
Thanks for that, Nancy. That was really, really interesting. Got some questions, but just quickly to everyone, because there's been a bit of chat within the chat section, but a lot of that's been answered within that section. So please, if anyone has any questions, yeah, keep them coming. Got one here though. What is the mechanism by which skins or other loot boxes can be transferred? Could this be interrupted? And do the game suppliers have any interest in this happening, or is it against their commercial interests?
So the skins that can be used for skin gambling are only a small select ones. So CSGO, Dota, and they're all owned by the Valve Corporation, so one particular video game developer. They actually get a bit of a profit out of skins being traded from their platform. So each time you do trade it, they get a bit of a profit. So I don't think they're very incentivized to stop the activity, though I have tried to block it, and they've put a sort of 14-day hold on the skins being transferred. I could explain how they're transferred. It's something to do with the open source system that Valve has. So skins in general for most video games, they can't be used for gambling, and skins in general for most that come out of loot boxes can't be sold. So it's only a select few. Hope I've answered that question. If not, you can email me about it.
We've got another one here. So this is from Tony Phillips. A few years ago, my impression was esports providers were opposed to gambling on their product. Is this still the case?
Yeah, I think it is very much so. I remember reading a report with the esports industry and different key stakeholders, and that was one of their top concerns was gambling around esports. So while I've said a few gambling operators do sponsor esports, it's not a whole lot. It's just a select few. I know when I was doing my research on esports betting that I did approach a lot of esports organizations to help me recruit participants and stuff, and they expressed that they don't condone it. There are rules against their players gambling as well in their, I'm not sure what it's called, but yeah, no. But they still didn't want to help me with my study, so.
Yeah, okay. Another one, so has there been any interest from the video game industry or any attempt to engage with that industry regarding any of this work?
Around gambling, or? I don't think so. Not that I've seen.
Okay.
In short.
Yeah, sure. So again, to anyone, I think that's the end of the questions that are there.
I think the video game, there's definitely a role for video game developers to play where gambling is concerned, but that's up to them what role. I think discussions need to occur.
Yeah, sure. So that's the end of the questions so far. Maybe just give it another minute or so and see if anyone else, fires something in. Otherwise,
no worries.
Awkward silence. Okay. Oh, we've got a couple now. How do you think esports will progress post-pandemic?
I don't know. I have seen figures that esports betting has decreased once sports betting was opened, but I don't know if esports viewing itself, if the sports organisations keep up their partnerships with esports, then maybe it will increase. I think time will tell.
Sure. Okay, we've got one from Lindsay here. I've heard that sports gamblers began betting on novelty events in esports in March and April when mainstream sports was suspended. However, this interest has subsided by May when mainstream sport returned. Is there any research on this?
Novelty sports?
Yeah, novelty sports and esports.
And esports. I don't think
novelty events as well, so not even just
novelty events. Yeah, not in Australia, but I have seen stuff from the UK Gambling Commission, which has been releasing sort of gambling operator data showing that there has been a decrease when in virtual. So sports betting went back up after things were opening up, and the others started declining after everything started opening up. But the UK is shutting down again, so you might see an increase in these activities again. But as far as surveys and looking at demographics and different, relationships, I don't think that data's out there yet.
Yeah, okay.
Could come out tomorrow though, you never know. I keep an eye out for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's about it now. So yeah, thanks very much. That was fantastic talk, and yeah, I'll throw you back to Mark.
Please. I hope everyone learned something.
Thanks, Luke. And I'm sure on behalf of everyone who's attended the webinar, a big thank you to Nancy for her time and the many insights that you've provided. I'm sure we've all got a better understanding of how video games have changed over time, gaming in Australia. Esports, what it is, its viewership and esports betting, and obviously some of the risks involved with esports with regard to gambling related harm. It's a fast evolving, growing area that is very dynamic and is changing sort of day by day. So, and obviously potentially we look forward to a follow-up